All right, so we're starting with armor of God for stars. And your memory verse is put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And that's Ephesians 6:11. Imagine that it's a very cold day in January. Unfortunately, this is January 5th and it's quite warm. It's not a cold day. But imagine that it is cold and you snuggle down under your warm blankets. But then your mom calls you to wake you up to get ready for school. How many of you've had it where, cold mornings, you don't want to get out from underneath your warm blanket, do you?
I just take my blanket to school,
After getting dressed and eating breakfast, you grab your books and coat and out the door. As you open the door, the snow blows inside. Believe it or not, we had snow in Lake City the other day, supposedly.
What? What? I don't want snow.
Police actually videotaped it snowing in Lake City the other day. Not enough for it to stay on the ground, though. It just snow flurries, snowflakes. Okay. You realize that you need more than just your coat for protection from the cold. What else do you need?
Your scarf, your boots, and your hat.
Right.
And your face mask.
Gloves, hat, earmuffs, scarf, book, boots. All these things will help you battle the snow on the way to the bus. Just as we need protection for our physical body, we need protection for our spiritual bodies also. Did you know that everyone on the earth is in a battle between good and evil? The Bible teaches us that Satan is a very real enemy of ours. In Ephesians 6:12, it states that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. But God gives us exactly what we need for this spiritual battle. In this unit, we're going to discuss the armor of God and what it is and how to use it. First, let's look at what we mean by armor. Everybody's seen classic fairy tales where the knights are in armor. From head to toe, they're in metal, right? Everybody seen that?
Yeah. Technically, first they put on chainmail, then they put on the armor. So technically, they're right double.
It doesn't matter. It's metal and it's armor. They do this to protect their bodies from the enemy that they're fighting. That's not what?
I said, what about stormtroopers?
Stormtroopers are fictional. They're not real. Stormtroopers is from Star Wars, which is a made-up movie. It is not real.
So, never mind.
Armor has been around for a long time. Armor's been around since
medieval.
Well, even before medieval time, there was different types of armor. They used leather before metal was found and produced, before the Iron Age, and also leather and all was used to protect, and heavy animal pelts during the cavemen time era and all. They use heavy animal pelts to protect their skins. So armor's been around for a long time. And like I just said, that cavemen wore animal skins to protect them from attack. As weapons became more sophisticated, armor gradually did too. Armor developed into a metal covering for a soldier to wear during battle. Greek and Romans had a similar armor, which we'll be looking at during this lesson. When Paul wrote the book of Ephesians, he was probably very familiar with the Roman soldiers' army, having been in jail so many times. The people he was writing to had probably seen armor many times also, because Roman soldiers were often on the streets of their towns. Since we don't see armor every day, it might seem strange to us to think about wearing armor. Soldiers today wear a type of armor: combat boots, helmets, and bulletproof vest. Let's look at what Paul says a Christian should wear for armor. If we look at Ephesians chapter 6, 13 through 18. Skipped over it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does the end of the Bible say how the world's gonna end? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Ephesians chapter 6, 13 through 18. And oh my goodness, that's tiny type. It says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the saints. So what's the first thing in Ephesians 6:13 does Paul mention that we put on first? He tells us to put on the belt of truth. Why do you think that he tells us to put on the belt of truth first?
Ephesians 1.
6. Why do you think he tells us to put on the belt of truth first? Well, what does the belt protect on your body? Your waist. So initially, what organs would the belt protect? Your gut.
Yeah.
We'll just be nice and say your gut.
Your intestines.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Your gut.
Your small intestines
And your appendix and your bladder. Nope, your kidneys are higher up, believe it or not.
Where?
Your kidneys are about right here.
In my back?
Yep, they're towards your back.
What?
Yeah. So the belt of truth, a belt would protect your waistline, your gut section. So the belt of truth, we are to enter the world with truth. So when we're looking at a physical body that it protects our gut, what comes out of our system through that area? Nasty, foul, dirty stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. All the toxins that's been collected and waste passes through our waist pelvic area. So when we're looking at it, that when in the world that we want to enter the world with truth and not with falsification and lies. Chapter 6. Last chapter of Ephesians. A Roman soldier wore a piece of armor around his middle like a belt. This piece of armor not only protected all of his vital organs, but it held the rest of the armor together. The Roman soldier's armor was constructed mainly of bronze and sometimes steel, and it would protect against arrows, spears, and swords, which were the main weapons that they fought with during that time. The next piece of armor that Paul mentions is the breastplate of righteousness. The breastplate, what do you think that covers?
Your chest area?
It covers your chest area. So when we're talking about a belt, now ladies, when we're talking about a belt, we're not talking about the small belts that we put here. The belts that they had were probably bigger than that, because when we're talking about that, it puts the armor together. When you look at an actual armor of a knight, you had the legs that they had to step into that had to be buckled up through the waistline area, so the belt had to connect that. And then you had your breastplate, which would cover basically from here to about here. So the belt had to connect all of that together. And we know that the breastplate would protect our heart and our lungs. So the breastplate of righteousness. Righteousness means what? Either one of y'all.
Righteousness means like purity, maybe? Like, you don't lie, you're sin.
Right, you're to be righteous, to go forth with truth.
But none of us are righteous.
You can walk in righteousness.
You can.
When you obey God. It's not to say that we don't sin. We can still be righteous in sin. Unfortunately, we would rather be righteous without sin. The Roman soldiers wanted to protect his entire body from the neck to the waist, in front and in the back. The breastplate was good protection for his heart and lungs in front, and for his spine in case he was attacked from behind.
Which verse is it?
6:13 through 18. It was made of some type of metal or metal chains linked together to make it strong. Emma, you were saying metal chains and then metal on top. A lot of times, depending on which country you came from, the metal chains would be that breastplate. They wouldn't have a solid, because in England, they wore the metal chains. In Rome, yeah, it's linked chains.
It's called chainmail.
It's called what?
Chainmail. Chainmail.
It was like a chain vest that you just literally slipped into and cover your arms and through here. But the problem with those chains, even though they were small, the tip of a spear could go through them. But the English wore those, whereas the Romans wore the full metal, trying to protect it. Some actually wore both. Like if you were a king, they would put the chain under the actual armor, because he wanted double protection. Paul talks about the shoes a soldier wore. Roman soldiers did most of their combat standing on their feet in the field. They needed good protection in order to stand firm while they were fighting the enemy. Paul compares the Christian soldier's shoes to the gospel of peace. Now, during that time, many people wore sandals. Would you go out in a battle in full armor with sandals on? No. So they fashioned metal shoes that would attach to the leggings for the armor. And when we're talking about the shoes being the gospel of peace, in other words, when we go out, we're not to go out. We can be angry at our mom or we can be angry at our dad, but we are not to go out and look at our brothers as soon as we get out of the house and go, I hate you. That's not walking in the gospel of peace. That's walking out in hatred. What's next? The shield of faith. Most people would use the left arm to have their shield on, and their arms would slip in it, because they would use their right arm to have a spear or a sword, because most people generally were right-handed. And not only that, they would do it to where when they would get in forces that they could kneel down and put their shield, and everybody would line up and their shields would form like a wall. So the shield of faith, we all need faith in everything that we do. When we walk out into this world, we must have faith. Paul did not have in mind the small circular kind, but a body shield made of wood about 2.5 feet wide and 4 foot long. It is strapped in the back for the soldiers to hook over his arm so that he could move the shield whichever way he needed to against darts and spears. Sometimes the soldiers' shields had hooks to join to the other soldiers' shields so that they could make a row of protection. And they standardly did that if people were shooting bows and arrows, that they could put that wall up and crouch behind it, and the soldiers behind them could stand behind that wall. And those that were close enough to that wall of shields could possibly be more protected than the ones that were further back. The helmet of salvation is another part of armor. Can you name a few people who wears helmets today?
A knight.
If we had knights, yes. But motorcyclists, football players, skateboarders, combat soldiers, they all wear helmets to protect their heads.
Bicycle riders do too.
Bicycle riders.
Motorcycle riders too.
I said motorcyclist.
And dirt bike riders.
Yep. They all wear helmets to protect their heads. Any soldier knows that an injury to the brain can be fatal. So we've got the helmet of salvation. Salvation's what? Come on, ladies.
I know what I think. What to say.
Go ahead, say it. It's just me and you talking. You're not being picked up by that. I am. Salvation's what? Jesus gives us the gift of salvation. So we're putting the helmet of salvation on because we want to protect our mind from the schemes of the devil. Because like I said, when things go in here or in here, we want to have that helmet of salvation on to protect our eyes and our ears so that things don't go down into our hearts and fly out our mouths at inappropriate times. The only weapon that Paul talks about is the sword of the Spirit. Do you know what Paul is talking about? The Bible. The Bible is the sword. If you read the Bible, you hear numerous times talked about the sword, the sword, the sword. They're not talking about a physical sword. They're talking about the Word of God. The Bible is our best weapon as a Christian. The sword was the Roman soldier's best weapon also. Soldiers spent many hours practicing to use the sword because they knew it was the best defense in battle. Don't forget that you're in a spiritual battle. Next week, we'll discuss more about what Paul meant for each piece of armor and how we are to use that armor as protection today.